Nathaniel Whitaker set the marriage contract on fire at 9:30 on a Tuesday evening. Not from anger, not from madness. He touched the corner of the document to the candle flame with the same steady hand he used to sign land deeds and court orders, deliberate, unhurried entirely. Certain, and he watched 11 days of his mother's careful planning curl black at the edges and dissolve into ash on the study hearth, and he felt for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember that he was breathing correctly. He had heard a woman laugh 3 hours earlier. That was all it had taken. If that opening stopped your heart the way it stopped mine, stay with us. Subscribe to this channel, follow this story all the way to its last word, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to know how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the night a single sound changed everything. Nathaniel Whitaker thought he knew about the life he was living. The contract had been sitting on his desk for 11 days, not because he was uncertain. Nathaniel Whitaker had not been uncertain about anything since he was 26 years old. The morning he stood at his father's grave in the November cold and understood with the particular clarity that grief sometimes brings. That uncertainty was a luxury. The dead leave behind for the living to sort out. He had sorted it out. He had taken the estate accounts and the land disputes and the creditors who thought a young heir might be easier to manage than his father had been, and he had handled all of it methodically, completely without flinching, and he had not been uncertain since. The contract sat on his desk because he had not yet decided when to sign it. There was a difference. He knew the difference. His mother had placed it there herself 11 days ago, with both hands, the way a woman places something she has carried a long distance and is relieved to finally set down. Margaret Whitaker was 61 years old and had been managing the Whitaker family's social obligations since before Nathaniel was born, and she brought to the task of finding her son a suitable wife the same focused efficiency she brought to everything else. Research, patience, and an absolute refusal to consider any factor that could not be measured. Elizabeth Harrington, she had said, not looking at him, smoothing the edge of the document with one finger. 25. Educated. The family holds 3,000 acres along the eastern ridgeland. Your grandfather spent 20 years trying to acquire. A marriage consolidates everything. The lawyers have reviewed the terms. They're fair. I'm sure they are, Nathaniel said. You haven't read it. I'll read it. Nathaniel. She looked at him then, and her eyes were not unkind, which was almost worse than if they had been. You are 35 years old. The estate needs an heir. The Harrington land would double our eastern holdings. Elizabeth is everything a woman in her position ought to be. She paused. I am not asking you to fall in love with her. I am asking you to be sensible. He had looked at the contract. He had thought, I have been sensible my entire life. He had said, I'll read it this week. She had nodded and left the room, and he had read it that same evening. All of it. Every clause, every provision, every carefully worded paragraph about land transfer and financial arrangements, and it was, as she said, fair. Completely fair. The kind of document that two families produced when they both understood exactly what they were doing and had no intention of pretending otherwise. Elizabeth Harrington was not pretending otherwise either. He had met her twice, once at the Caldwell Winter Gathering, once at a county dinner the following month, and she had been both times precisely what his mother described. Composed, intelligent, well-spoken, and entirely aware of the nature of the arrangement they were both being steered toward. She did not giggle. She did not flatter. She asked sensible questions and listened to the answers with the focused attention of someone who took information seriously. He respected her. He had wondered in the carriage home from the county dinner whether that was going to be enough. He had decided not to think about it. He was good at deciding not to think about things. It was, he had come to understand, one of the essential skills of a man in his position. The Beaumont Spring Gathering arrived on a Thursday evening in late April, and Nathaniel went the way he went, to everything prepared, punctual, and with the specific interior flatness of a man who has attended enough social events to know exactly how they will proceed. His mother had arranged his attendance. She arranged most of his social calendar, not because he was incapable of managing it himself, but because she was better at it, and they both knew it, and arguing the point would have cost more energy than it saved. She had mentioned the Beaumont gathering over breakfast as if it were a weather observation. The Beaumonts are hosting their spring evening Thursday. Elizabeth will be there. Mrs. Harrington has indicated the family expects some kind of formal indication before the month is out. Before the month is out, he repeated. It is nearly May. He went on Thursday. The Beaumont house was warm with candlelight, and the particular noise of a Virginia spring gathering, conversation and laughter layered over the sound of someone playing the pianoforte. In the next room, the whole thing wrapped in the smell of early flowers and good candle wax. Nathaniel moved through it with his usual ease, the ease that looked from the outside like contentment, and he spoke to the people he was supposed to speak to and listened to the conversations he was supposed to listen to. He found Elizabeth near the garden windows. She turned when he approached. Her smile arrived precisely on time, warm enough, controlled enough, the exact expression a woman produced in this situation, when she had been raised to understand exactly what this situation required. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "I'm glad you could come." "Miss Harrington." He took her hand. "You look well." "Thank you. The gardens here are extraordinary this time of year." "They are." There was a pause. Not an awkward pause. They were both too well trained for awkward, but a pause that was, he registered somewhere beneath the careful surface of his attention, completely hollow. The kind of silence that two people produced when they were both performing consideration of the other person, without either of them actually reaching the other person at all. Her mother materialized at Elizabeth's left shoulder and began talking about the Beaumont garden design, and Nathaniel responded, and Elizabeth agreed, and her mother agreed with Elizabeth's agreement, and the conversation moved through its paces like a carriage on a familiar road, smooth, predictable, going exactly where it was always going to go. He excused himself after 20 minutes. Robert Alderton caught him near the fireplace, the way Robert always caught him at these things, with the easy navigation of a man who had been reading Nathaniel's social expressions for 30 years. "You look," Robert said pleasantly, accepting a glass from a passing servant, "like a man attending his own sentencing." "I look like a man attending a spring gathering. You've always been a terrible liar." Robert glanced toward Elizabeth. "She's perfectly fine, you know. There are worse fates." "I'm aware." "Then what's the face about?" Nathaniel looked at his glass. "There's no face. There's absolutely a face. There's been a face since you walked in." Robert studied him with the mild curiosity of someone who found the situation interesting but not urgent. "What are you waiting for, Nathaniel? You've read the contract. The arrangement makes sense. Elizabeth is—" He stopped. Robert stopped because Nathaniel had gone still. Not the stillness of consideration or decision. The complete involuntary stillness of a man whose entire attention has been pulled out of his body by something outside his control. The sound came from across the room. A laugh. Not the kind of laugh that happened at parties. The social percussion of it. The managed brightness. The sound that women made when they understood that men expected amusement and that withholding it had consequences. Not that. This was something entirely different, low and unguarded and helplessly genuine, the laugh of a person who had been caught completely off guard by something funny and had not had a single instant to decide whether laughing was appropriate. It rose above the room's noise for just 3 seconds. Nathaniel turned. At the far end of the room, near one of the settees, a woman in a dark blue dress was pressing her hand over her mouth, not to suppress the laugh it had already escaped, but because the aftermath of it had surprised even her. Beside Mrs. Patton, the widow, who had lived on the Beaumont property line since before anyone in the room could remember, was shaking her head with the fond exasperation of someone who had not expected to find anything this entertaining at a Thursday evening gathering, and was slightly undone by it. The woman in the blue dress lowered her hand. She was still smiling. Not the aftermath of a performance, but the real thing. The smile of someone who had genuinely been ambushed by joy and hadn't quite recovered yet. She said something to Mrs. Patton that Nathaniel couldn't hear from across the room, and Mrs. Patton shook her head again and reached out and patted the younger woman's hand, and the younger woman ducked her head slightly, still smiling, and the whole exchange lasted perhaps 15 seconds and involved no one else in the room and was completely, entirely unaware of being observed. That was the thing that held him. Not her face though she was. He registered it peripherally, the way you registered weather, genuinely pretty. Not the laugh itself, though the laugh was what had made him turn. It was the unawareness. The total unperformed absence of self-consciousness in a room where everyone else, himself included, was conducting themselves with the careful awareness of being seen. This woman was not performing. She was not curating an impression. She was talking to an old widow about something that had genuinely struck her as funny, in a room full of people who had important things to be doing, and she did not care even slightly who noticed. He noticed. "Who is that?" he said. Robert followed his gaze. Clara Beaumont, I believe, cousin of the house, the Kentucky branch. Her father died a couple of years back. She's been running the family property out there herself since then. Small operation, a couple 100 acres. Robert paused. Nathaniel. Elizabeth Harrington is standing approximately 12 feet to your left. I know where Elizabeth Harrington is standing. Just making sure. Robert watched him for a moment. The Kentucky Beaumonts don't have money, you understand, or connections of any particular use, or... What did you say about the property? Robert stopped. Pardon. She's been running it herself, since her father died. That's what I've heard. Turned down 2 offers to sell both at fair prices. People thought she was being stubborn. Robert tilted his head slightly. Word is, she understood the land's value better than the men making the offers. Nathaniel looked across the room. Clara Beaumont had finished her conversation with Mrs. Patton and was standing alone near the window now, not with the self-conscious posture of someone who was aware of being unaccompanied and was managing the impression of it, but with the easy stillness of someone who was simply comfortable. She was looking at something outside her head, turned slightly entirely at rest, inside herself, in a way that Nathaniel could not remember the last time he had felt. He did not walk across the room. He made this decision firmly and with full awareness of making it, and then he went back to Elizabeth Harrington and was attentive and appropriate, and said the right things for the remainder of the evening. He was good at this. He had been good at it for a long time. Elizabeth was pleasant and intelligent, and they discussed the county road expansion and the Harrington property's new grain operation, and she asked him a question about the Whitaker drainage situation that indicated she had done some research into his estate, which was either flattering or slightly unnerving, or both. And he answered it thoroughly, and she listened carefully, and it was by every measure a productive and appropriate exchange. I thought about it the entire carriage ride home. Not the exchange with Elizabeth. The other thing. The sound from across the room. The woman who had laughed without deciding to. He told himself, as the carriage moved through the dark Virginia roads, that this was exactly the kind of thing his mother had been referring to when she said, I am not asking you to fall in love with her. I am asking you to be sensible. His mother had known when she said it that there was something in him that might need that instruction. He had thought she was being overly cautious. I was beginning to think she had been right, and that this realization was going to be profoundly inconvenient. He went to bed. He did not sleep. At 7 in the morning, James knocked on the study door. Pardon, sir. This was left at the kitchen entrance before first light. No name. The woman who left it said you'd know what it was. Nathaniel took the parcel. A book. Plain cover worn at the corners. A practical agricultural volume on soil management and drainage that serious farmers consulted and drawing rooms ignored. A card inside the front cover. The handwriting clear and unhurried. The kind of script that came from someone who wrote to communicate rather than to be admired. Mr. Whitaker, you mentioned the drainage trouble on your north fields. Chapter 7. It worked for us in Kentucky. Try the channel positioning first before you move any soil. C. Beaumont. He read it twice. Then he sat down. He had mentioned the drainage problem in passing to Robert during the gathering, in a conversation he had not even completed. He had not directed it anywhere near Clara Beaumont. He had not been aware she was within hearing. She had been standing across a crowded room talking to an old widow. She had heard him. She had remembered a specific detail. She had gone home, found a book, and left it at his kitchen entrance before 7 in the morning with a 3-line note that contained no flattery, no social maneuvering, and no attempt whatsoever to create an impression. Just here is a thing that might help you. He opened to chapter 7. He read it standing up still in his coat from the morning walk, not quite having decided to sit down yet. He read it all the way through. Then he went to find his estate manager. They spent the morning in the North Fields. Nathaniel had the book in his hand and his boots in the mud, and by midday they had identified 3 positioning errors that had been compounding the drainage problem for 2 full seasons. Errors that no one had caught. Errors that he had paid 2 different consultants to find and that neither of them had located. A woman he had spoken to for 30 seconds across a crowded room, who had been busy laughing at something an old widow said, had solved his drainage problem before breakfast. He stood in the North Field with mud on his boots and chapter 7 in his hand and thought, what else does she know? That afternoon he rode to the county lending library. He told himself he was returning the book, which was true as far as it went. She was there, not waiting. He registered immediately and with some relief that she was not waiting. She was working a ledger open on the reading table, a pencil moving her attention so completely absorbed in a column of figures that she did not look up when he came in. She sat the way she had stood at the window the night before, completely present in herself, not managing anything, not performing anything, simply a person doing a task. He walked to the table. He set the book down. She looked up. Her eyes were green, a detail he had not registered across a crowded room, and now registered fully and filed away in a part of his mind that was already keeping more information about this woman than was strictly reasonable, given that they had never had a conversation. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, not startled, not performing surprise, just acknowledging the fact of him with the same directness she apparently brought to everything. "Chapter 7, he said. "The channel positioning. You were right." Something moved in her expression, not the performed pleasure of receiving a compliment, but the specific satisfaction of a practical solution confirmed by evidence. "You tested it already. This morning, we'd been placing the channels 18 inches too high for 2 seasons. She nodded. "The natural grade on your east slope, I guessed at it from the topography. Most drainage problems on that kind of elevation come from fighting the grade instead of working with it." She tilted her head slightly. "How bad was the compounding damage?" he told her, in detail. She listened, not the waiting to speak. Listening he encountered in most conversations, but actual listening. The kind that produced follow-up questions, informed by what you had actually heard, rather than by what you planned to say next. She asked about the soil composition on the affected sections. She asked whether he was using the spring-fed channel or the diverted creek for primary drainage. She asked about the northeast corner specifically because, in her experience, the northeast corner of a slope that presented this kind of problem was usually where the original error had been made. The northeast corner was exactly where the original error had been made. He looked at her across the reading table. "You have 200 acres, he said. 180 now. I sold a woodlot 2 years ago to cover the winter labor costs. I'd have sold it sooner, honestly, but I had to wait for the timber price to come up." She said it without apology or embarrassment, simply a fact of managing something with limited resources and making the best possible decisions under constraint. "The remaining 180 are good land. Better than people think, because people make assumptions about Kentucky's soil without having actually studied it. And you've studied it." "I've lived on it," she said, "which is different but more useful." She paused, and something shifted slightly in her expression. Not caution exactly, but attention. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Whitaker?" "Yes." "Why did you come in person? You could have sent a note through the house." He was quiet for a moment. It was a direct question, and she asked it directly without the social packaging that would have made it easier to deflect. "I wanted to ask about the northeast corner," he said. She looked at him steadily. "You could have put that in a note too." "I could have." She waited. "I wanted," he said carefully, "to understand how you knew." She considered this. "I've made every drainage mistake there is to make on a smaller scale. When your grandfather built your Northfield channels, I'm assuming your grandfather, it looks like older work. He was working with the conventional wisdom of the time. The conventional wisdom was wrong. It took me 2 bad seasons and one very honest conversation with an old farmer in Lexington to figure out why. She paused. Most people don't ask old farmers. They ask consultants. I asked 2 consultants, Nathaniel said. Neither of them found it. Consultants are expensive, Clara said. So they tell you something whether or not they've actually found anything to tell you. He laughed. He had not expected to laugh. It came out before he had decided to the same involuntary quality as the thing that had made him turn across the crowded room the night before, and he registered this with something that was not quite surprise, but was close to it. Clara Beaumont looked for just a moment like she had not expected him to laugh either. Then the corner of her mouth moved in what was not quite a smile, but was the shape one made before it arrived. "Sit down, Mr. Whitaker," she said, "before you strain something standing there being formal." He sat down. They talked for 2 hours, about drainage, and then about soil composition, and then about the particular challenges of clay-heavy Virginia land versus the sandy loam she was working with in Kentucky, and then because the conversation moved, the way good conversations moved, following its own logic, regardless of intention about the agricultural almanac that everyone in the county referenced, as if it were scripture, and whether it was actually useful or simply authoritative enough that admitting you found it useful made you feel educated. "It's half useful," Clara said, flipping to a page with the ease of someone who had already argued this point before. "The section on winter cover crops is genuinely good. The section on water management is completely wrong for anyone farming east of the mountains." The author was working from Ohio data and either didn't know or didn't care that the gradient relationship changes completely once you're past a certain elevation. "You've read the full almanac." "I've read everything I could get my hands on," she said without self-congratulation. It was simply the thing she had done because there was no one else to ask. "When my father died, I was 24 years old, and I had 180 acres and 3 farm hands and a brother in Philadelphia who had no intention of coming back. I read everything." "Your brother didn't?" "No," she said, simply completely without bitterness that he could hear. "He built a legal practice. He's good at it. It was the right choice for him." She turned another page. "It left me with a farm to manage and no particular guidance from anyone who had done it before." "That must have been difficult," she said. "Yes, for the first year very." She looked up. "Also the best education I've ever had. You learn things when you have no option but to figure them out." She paused. "I imagine you know something about that." He was quiet. She was looking at him with that direct attention she gave everything, not prying, not performing sympathy, simply present with what was being said. "My father died when I was 26, he said. "I know. Your estate is well run. It shows the kind of management that comes from learning by doing, not by inheriting a system that already works." She said it matter-of-factly, like pointing at something visible. "You've expanded the acreage significantly in the past decade. The boundary resolution on the northeastern quarter was particularly well handled." He stared at her. "I asked about your property before I sent the book," she said without embarrassment. "I wanted to make sure the Chapter 7 solution would translate. Your topography and scale are different from mine. You researched my estate. To make sure I wasn't giving you advice that would make things worse." She seemed to find his expression amusing. "I wasn't flattering you, Mr. Whitaker. I was checking my work." He sat back in his chair. In 35 years of managing Whitaker Estate, he had been flattered, deferred to, advised, and occasionally lied to by people who wanted things from him. He had been offered compliments calibrated to his position and his wealth and his social standing. He had sat across desks and dinner tables from men who told him what he wanted to hear because they understood that agreeing with him had value. He had never, that he could recall, had someone tell him his estate was well run because they had verified it independently before sending him a book about drainage. "Miss Beaumont," he said. Why did you send the book honestly?" She set her pencil down. She looked at him with the specific quality of attention that meant she was actually answering rather than performing an answer. "Because you had a problem," she said. "And I knew a solution, and it would have been strange not to say anything." She paused. "Also, I'm only in Virginia for 3 more weeks, and I don't know enough people here to have pleasant conversation, and Mrs. Patton is wonderful, but she's 82, and she falls asleep after dinner, and I thought—" She stopped, started again. "I thought you seemed like someone who could talk about actual things." "Actual things," he said, "as opposed to the weather and the garden design and who is performing appropriately." She said it without contempt, but without apology. "I don't know how to talk about those things for very long before I run out of patience." He looked at her for a long moment. "Same time Thursday," he said. She looked at him. That careful look again, not the careful of performance, but of a person deciding whether to trust something new. "Thursday," she said. He walked out of the library, into the afternoon light, and he was halfway to the horse before he realized that for 2 solid hours he had not thought once about the contract on his desk. That evening he sat in his study. The fire burned low. The contract sat in its usual place at the corner of the desk, 11 days old, now its edges crisp and official and entirely clear about what was expected of him. He picked up his pen. He held it. I thought about a woman who had read the full agricultural almanac because she had no other option. He thought about Chapter 7 and Northeast Corners and 2 bad seasons and 1 honest conversation with an old farmer in Lexington. He thought about what it felt like to laugh without deciding to, and whether he had done that before tonight, and how far back he would have to go to find the last time. He put the pen down. He picked up the contract. He looked at it for a long time in the firelight, at his mother's neat notation, in the margin at the signatures of the lawyers, at the blank line where his name was meant to go. Then he opened the desk drawer. He took out a fresh sheet of paper. He wrote, "Please hold all further action on the Harrington matter until you hear from me directly." He sealed it. He addressed it to his solicitor. He placed it on top of the contract. Then he sat back in his chair and listened to the fire, and felt the specific, unfamiliar feeling of a man who has just made a decision. He cannot entirely explain, not to his solicitor, not to his mother, not to anyone in the ordered and reasonable world he had built so carefully around himself, but who understands with a certainty that bypasses reason entirely that it is the first honest thing he has done in a very long time. Outside, the Virginia night was clear and cold, and somewhere across the county, in a borrowed room, in her cousin's house, a woman who knew about Northeast Corners and the wrong uses of almanac data and the particular stubbornness required to refuse a fair price for land you understood better than the man offering to buy it, was sitting up past midnight with a ledger on her knees. Not because anyone had asked her to, not because there was anyone to notice, but because the work needed doing, and she was the one who knew how. Nathaniel Whitaker sat in his study with a sealed letter on top of an unsigned contract, and thought about Thursday. He thought it was going to be a very long 2 days. Thursday came and went. Then the following Tuesday. Then Thursday again. By the 3rd week, Nathaniel had stopped telling himself he was going to the library to return something, or verify a drainage calculation, or follow up on a specific agricultural question. He went because Clara Beaumont was there, and because the 2 hours he spent at that reading table were the only 2 hours in any given week during which he felt entirely like himself. Not the heir to Whitaker estate, not his mother's son, not the man with the contract on his desk, but simply a person having a conversation with another person who had no interest whatsoever in managing him. It was, he was beginning to understand, an extraordinary thing to find. She was already at the table when he arrived, that 3rd Thursday, ledger open, pencil, moving the particular focused stillness he had come to recognize as her default state when she was working through a problem. She did not look up immediately. He sat down across from her and waited, and after perhaps 30 seconds, she said without lifting her eyes from the column of figures, "The Northeast Channel held through the rain we had Monday." "I know," he said. "I walked it Tuesday morning. Good runoff pattern. Better than anything we've had in 2 seasons. She looked up then, and the expression on her face was the one he had come to watch for. Not the managed warmth of a social smile, but the real thing, brief and unguarded, the expression of a person who had done a calculation and found the answer correct. I thought it would. The grade on that section was steeper than I estimated from the description. Steeper grade, better natural drainage once the channels are properly positioned. You estimated the grade from my description. I made an educated guess from your description," she corrected. "There's a difference." What would you have done if the guess had been wrong? Told you immediately and figured out what actually needed doing. She said it without hesitation, the way she said everything, as if the possibility of being wrong was simply one of the conditions of working on real problems, not a thing to be embarrassed about. Being wrong isn't the problem. Staying wrong because you can't admit it, that's the problem. Nathaniel looked at her. I thought about 2 consultants who had charged him substantial fees to tell him things that weren't true, delivered with the full confidence of men who understood that admitting uncertainty cost them future business. I think, he said, that you would be a terrifying person to negotiate against. Something sparked in her eyes. I've been told that. By whom? Thomas Caldwell. She said the name the way you said the name of something mildly unpleasant, not with heat, just with recognition. He came out to Kentucky himself the second time he tried to buy the eastern pasture. Brought a lawyer, very official. I imagine he expected me to be more impressed than I was. What did you say to him? I said his price was still insulting. His lawyer's land assessment was either incompetent or deliberately dishonest, and that if he came back a third time, he should bring a better number or not bother. She turned a page in the ledger. He hasn't come back. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Young Thomas Caldwell is the reason my north boundary negotiation has been stalled for 8 months. She looked up sharply. The Caldwell property borders yours on the north. Inherited it from his father last year. The elder Caldwell and I had an understanding. The son has decided to revisit everything his father agreed to. Nathaniel paused. He's been, as you put it, deliberately obstructionist. He does that, Clara said with the certainty of direct experience. He finds the thing the other person needs most, and then he makes that thing as difficult as possible to get, and he waits to see how uncomfortable you're willing to let him make you. She tilted her head. What does he want from you? Water rights. There's a tributary that runs through our shared boundary. His father had access at 3 points. He wants 5. And you said? I said I'd consider a 4th access point. He said 4 was insufficient, and that he'd need to consult his lawyers before any further discussion. Clara set her pencil down. She looked at him with the direct assessing quality that he had stopped finding disconcerting and had started finding he chose the word carefully bracing. Like cold air. Like something that woke you up. He's not going to negotiate with you, she said. Not in good faith. Every counter you make, he'll move the goal. That's not a man trying to reach an agreement, that's a man trying to establish that you need him more than he needs you. I'm aware. Then stop giving him the satisfaction of counteroffers. She leaned forward slightly, both hands flat on the table. Name what he's doing, out loud, in company where it costs him something to have it named. She paused. Men like Thomas Caldwell rely on the other party being too well-mannered to say the obvious thing. The moment you say it, he has nothing. That's not how these negotiations are typically handled. You told me that before. Her eyes held his. Is how they're typically handled working? He didn't answer. She waited. No, he said. Then try something different. She picked up her pencil and went back to her ledger. He sat across from her and thought about 8 months of careful, measured, strategically managed correspondence with Thomas Caldwell Jr., and how precisely none of it had produced any result other than further delay, and how he had kept approaching it the same way, because it was the correct approach. The appropriate approach. The approach that a man in his position used when dealing with a boundary dispute, and how a woman with 180 acres in Kentucky had apparently solved the same problem in a single conversation by simply refusing to pretend the situation was something other than what it was. Miss Beaumont, he said. How is it that you know how to do this? She looked up. Do what? See things clearly, without... He searched for the word. Without the interference of how things are supposed to be handled. She considered this for a moment with the genuine consideration she gave every question that deserved one. I think, she said slowly, it's because I couldn't afford the interference. When my father died and I was alone on that property with 3 farmhands and a winter coming, I didn't have the luxury of managing impressions. I had to figure out what was actually true and act on it, or I was going to lose the land. She paused. Most people learn to manage impressions first and figure out what's true second. I learned it the other way around, and you find it difficult to go back. I find it, she said carefully, exhausting to pretend I can't see things I can see. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said very quietly, I think I understand that more than you might expect. Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, but a slight adjustment, like a door that had been held firmly closed, opening a fraction of an inch on its own. 3 weeks ago, he said, I attended the Beaumont Spring Gathering with every intention of returning home the same evening with a clear plan to finalize a marriage arrangement. He had not meant to say that. He watched her face absorb it, the information, the implication, all of it, with the steadiness he was learning to expect from her, the steadiness of a person who did not perform surprise. I know, she said. You know. Mrs. Patton told me. She knows everyone's business and she felt I should be aware of the context. And what did you do with that information? Clara looked at him directly. I sent you a book about drainage. You sent me a book about drainage, he said, knowing that you had a drainage problem, she said, which was true regardless of everything else. She paused. I wasn't thinking about the rest of it. I was thinking about the northeast corner. Were you? He said. A beat. A beat that lasted just long enough for something to shift in the room. Not dramatically. Nothing that could have been described in a letter or reported in conversation. But a shift that both of them felt, and neither of them named. Mostly, she said. He looked at his hands on the table. I should tell you, he said, that I wrote to my solicitor. The week after the gathering, I asked him to hold the Harrington matter. She was very still. I'm not? He stopped. Started again. I'm not telling you that to suggest anything, or to create an expectation. I'm telling you because you're the only person I've spoken to recently who would be genuinely unhappy if I said something false, and I find I've developed a habit of honesty in this direction. He gestured slightly, indicating the space between them, the table the past 3 weeks. Whatever this has been. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Outside the library windows, a cart moved past on the road. Someone called a greeting to someone else. The ordinary world continued its ordinary business entirely unaware. What did Miss Harrington say? Clara asked. She doesn't know yet. Your mother. She doesn't know either. Another pause. He could see her working through it, not emotionally, not with the fluttering alarm that the social world would have expected from a young woman receiving this kind of information, but practically the way she worked through every problem, assessing what was true, identifying what mattered. Mr. Whitaker, she said finally. Nathaniel, he said. He was slightly surprised by his own use of it. If you're going to tell me something honest, I'd rather you use my actual name. She looked at him. Nathaniel. She tried it once carefully. I'm going to say something that you may not want to hear. I generally find those are the things most worth hearing. I am here for 3 more weeks, she said. I have 180 acres in Kentucky that need me back before the summer planting. I have no money of particular consequence, no social connections of use to a man in your position, and no interest in becoming either of those things for someone else's convenience. She held his gaze. I want to be very clear about that, so that neither of us is confused about what these conversations are. He nodded slowly. And what are these conversations? I don't know yet, she said. But I know what they're not. He looked at her for a long time. That, he said, is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in this county possibly ever. The corner of her mouth moved. You said something like that before. It keeps being true. She picked up her pencil. He did not leave. They talked for another hour about the Caldwell negotiation, about the almanac, about a book she had found in her cousin's library that addressed the specific soil chemistry challenges of transitional climate zones, which she had annotated in the margins in her clear, unhurried hand, and which she slid across the table to him without ceremony, the way she did everything because it was useful, and therefore it should be shared. He walked home in the late afternoon light. He felt the way he imagined a man felt after a long illness began to lift. Not well. Exactly. Not yet, but aware for the first time in a long while that being well was a possibility. I was not prepared for what was waiting for him. His mother was in the front study when he returned, sitting in the chair she used when she was waiting for someone, which was the chair position to face the door. She was not reading. She was not writing. She was simply sitting, and when he came in, she looked at him with the expression she reserved for the category of situations she had anticipated and prepared for. "I spoke with Mr. Alderton today," she said. Nathaniel closed the door. "He mentioned that you have been spending a considerable amount of time at the county library in recent weeks." She paused. "With the Kentucky Beaumont girl." "Her name is Miss Clara Beaumont," Nathaniel said. "And yes." His mother was quiet for a moment, the quiet of a woman assembling what she wanted to say in the order that would be most effective. He had known this quiet his entire life. He braced for it without quite deciding to. "She is visiting for 3 weeks," his mother said. "She has no money, no connections, a small property that is, I understand, barely viable. Her family name is respectable, but not useful." She folded her hands in her lap. "I need to ask you, Nathaniel, very directly what you think you are doing." "I am having conversations with an intelligent woman about agriculture and land management," he said. "Among other things." "Among other things." She repeated it with the flat precision of someone removing the wrapping from a statement to examine what was underneath. "Robert tells me she is unusual." "She is." "And you find that appealing?" "I find it—" He looked for the word. "Necessary. I find it necessary in a way I wasn't aware I was missing until I encountered it." His mother looked at him for a long time. "I received a note from Mr. Bellamy this morning," she said. "Your solicitor. He says you have asked him to hold the Harrington matter." The room was very quiet. "When were you going to tell me?" she said. "When I had something definite to tell you. You have put an arrangement that took months to construct that represents a consolidation of land holdings. Your grandfather spent his life pursuing on hold." Her voice was controlled, completely controlled. "Because of a woman you met 3 weeks ago at a dinner party." "Because I am not certain," Nathaniel said, "that signing that contract is the right decision. Nathaniel, I have given this family 35 years of right decisions," he said, quietly. Not with anger, with something older than anger. Something that had been sitting at the back of his chest for a very long time, and was choosing now, apparently, to speak. "I have run this estate without error since I was 26 years old. I have made no financial mistakes, no social missteps, no choices that cost this family anything it could not afford." He looked at her. "I am asking for the time to be certain about this one." His mother looked at him. He had never spoken to her quite like that. Not defiantly, he was not a man given to defiance, but with the particular weight of someone who has finally located the thing they have been trying to say for a long time and has decided to say it. "She will go back to Kentucky," his mother said, "in 3 weeks. "I know. And then what?" "I don't know yet. The Harrington family will not wait indefinitely. Elizabeth is—" "A fine woman," he said. "I know that. I have always known that. Elizabeth deserves a man who chooses her because she is the right person, not because she is the right arrangement." He met his mother's eyes. "I'm not certain I am that man. I think she deserves to know that before a contract is signed that neither of us can undo." His mother was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had shifted slightly. Not dramatically, but enough. The efficiency was still there, the control. But underneath it, barely audible, something else. "Your father," she said, "was the right arrangement. My family needed the connection. His family needed the capital. It was very sensible." She paused. "For 31 years I was sensible about it." Nathaniel looked at her. She did not say anything further. She stood, smoothed her dress with both hands, and walked to the door. Then she stopped. "Be careful," she said. "Not a warning. Something more complicated than a warning. Be careful not to confuse the novelty of someone who tells you true things with the certainty that she is the right person. Those are not always the same." She left. He stood in the empty study for a long time. He thought about what his mother had and had not said. He thought about 31 years of sensible, He thought about a woman in a chair by a window who had told him without flinching exactly what these conversations were and were not, and who had sent him a book about drainage, because a problem existed, and she knew a solution, and it would have been strange not to. He thought about the difference between novelty and necessity. He wasn't sure he had the answer. What he knew was this: in the 3 weeks since a woman had laughed across a crowded room and turned his head without his permission, he had solved a 2-season drainage problem, identified the strategic error in an 8-month boundary negotiation, and had 4 conversations in which he had said more true things than in the previous 4 years combined. That was not novelty. He didn't know what it was exactly, but he knew it was not nothing. The following morning he rode to the Caldwell property. He had not sent word ahead. He did not bring a lawyer. He rode alone, tied his horse at the post, and knocked on the front door and asked for Thomas Caldwell Jr. directly. Caldwell received him in the front room with the particular wariness of a man who had expected a letter and gotten a person instead. He was younger than his father, early 30s, well-dressed with the kind of careful social confidence that came from having enough money that most disagreements eventually resolved in his favor. "Mr. Whitaker," he said. I wasn't expecting." "I know," Nathaniel said. "I came to say something directly, and I thought it was better said in person." Caldwell gestured to a chair. Nathaniel did not sit. "You have been deliberately prolonging the boundary negotiation," Nathaniel said. "Not because the terms are genuinely unacceptable, but because you believe that continued delay increases my willingness to concede on the water access points. You have been using procedural obstruction as a negotiating tactic, and you have been doing it for 8 months. Caldwell's expression went very still. "I am naming this," Nathaniel said, "because I've been told that men like you rely on the other party being too well-mannered to name it. So I'm naming it." He held the other man's gaze. "I'll offer 4 water access points with the usage terms we discussed in September. That offer is good until Friday. After Friday, I'll pursue the Eastern Diversion project I've been planning, which will redirect the tributary entirely within my property boundary, and you'll have access to none of them." Caldwell stared at him. "The Eastern Diversion would cost you a significant amount," Nathaniel agreed. "Less than 8 more months of this." A silence. "Friday," Nathaniel said. "Good day, Mr. Caldwell." He rode home. His hands were steady on the reins. His heart was not quite steady. But that was different. That was the feeling of having done something real, something that cut through 8 months of careful management and polite performance, and said the obvious thing out loud, in a room where saying it cost someone something. He thought about a woman in a Kentucky field who had told Thomas Caldwell his price was insulting, and who had not had to say it twice. "I thought I am learning things I did not know I needed to learn." 2 days later, a letter arrived from Caldwell's lawyer. 4 access points. September terms. Executed by Friday. Nathaniel read it twice. He wrote a single line back to his own solicitor. "The northern boundary matter has been resolved. Please proceed with documentation." Then he folded Clara Beaumont's annotated book, which had been sitting on the corner of his desk since she'd given it to him in the same spot where the contract had sat before it, and held it for a moment. He had 2 days left before she went back to Kentucky. He had spent 3 weeks in the proximity of a woman who understood northeast corners and told the truth and laughed without deciding to. And he had not once, not in any of their conversations in any of the hours at the library table, said the obvious thing out loud. He had been, he realized, doing exactly what he had accused Caldwell of doing. Managing. Delaying. Waiting to see how the situation resolved without having to name what it was. He set the book down. He picked up his pen. He did not write a letter. He sat there for a long time instead, with the pen in his hand and the book on the desk, and the spring afternoon coming through the window, and he thought about what his mother had said. Be careful not to confuse novelty with certainty. And he thought about what Clara had said. I know what these conversations are not. And he thought about all the things that neither of them had said, which were beginning to feel louder than everything that had been said. I thought she is leaving in 2 days. He thought I have been certain about exactly one thing in 3 weeks. He thought she is going to walk out of this county and back to her 180 acres in Kentucky, and I am going to sign a contract or not sign a contract, and nothing is going to be different either way, except that I am going to spend a very long time in a very large and well-managed house, knowing that I let the only conversation that has ever felt necessary simply end." He put the pen down. He stood up. He picked up his hat. He was halfway to the door when Robert Alderton arrived on foot, slightly out of breath, with the expression of a man who had been moving quickly and was trying to appear as though he hadn't been. "Nathaniel," Robert said. "Robert, I'm on my way out." "I know. That's why I came." Robert caught his breath. Elizabeth Harrington was at the Patton house this afternoon. Nathaniel stopped. "Mrs. Patton," Robert continued, "it appears is not merely old and entertaining. She is also extraordinarily well informed about the social situation in this county, and she has been by all accounts entirely without instruction from anyone discussing the recent developments with anyone who comes to call." "What developments?" "Your visits to the library," Robert said carefully. "Your conversation with Miss Beaumont. The note to Bellamy about the Harrington matter." He paused. "Elizabeth knows, Nathaniel. She has known for at least a week. Her mother knows. And I believe, from what I understand of Mrs. Harrington's character, that the family is not going to wait quietly for Friday, or for any day after Friday." Nathaniel stood very still. "There's more," Robert said. "Say it." Elizabeth asked Mrs. Patton for an introduction to Miss Beaumont. Robert looked at him steadily. "She's going to call on your cousin's house tomorrow morning." The room was very quiet. Nathaniel thought about Clara Beaumont, who told the truth and did not perform surprise, and had said with complete clarity, "I know what these conversations are not." He thought about Elizabeth Harrington, who was a fine woman and deserved better than the situation he had allowed to develop around her. He thought about the 2 days remaining and the 180 acres in Kentucky, and the ledger that was always open and the pencil that was always moving. "I thought I have been managing this." He thought, "I need to stop managing it." "Thank you, Robert," he said. He put on his hat. He walked out the door. He rode hard. Not because he had a plan. He didn't have a plan. He had a direction and a feeling in his chest that felt like the agricultural drainage problem in reverse. Everything that had been blocked for 2 seasons, suddenly moving the way it was supposed to move, fast and purposeful and impossible to stop once it started. Clara was at the cousin's house. He knew that because she had mentioned in passing 2 Tuesdays ago that her cousin retired early, and that she usually sat up in the front room with her ledger until the household went quiet. He had filed this information away, the way he filed everything she told him, not deliberately, not as strategy, but because his mind had developed without his permission the habit of keeping everything she said. He tied his horse at the gate. He knocked. The cousin, a pleasant, slightly bewildered woman named Mrs. Adeline Marsh, who had been watching the past 3 weeks unfold with the wide-eyed fascination of someone witnessing a weather event, opened the door, looked at him, looked at the hour and said, "She's in the front room," without being asked. Clara looked up from her ledger when he came in. She took in his expression. The coat he hadn't changed, the fact that he had ridden rather than walked, the specific quality of his stillness that she had learned in 3 weeks meant something had happened that he was still deciding how to hold. She set her pencil down. "Elizabeth Harrington is going to call on you tomorrow morning," he said. Clara was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Patton?" "Apparently. I suspected she might." Clara folded her hands on the ledger. "What does Miss Harrington want?" "I don't know." Robert didn't know. "But I think—" He stopped, started again. "I think she deserves to know what is happening before she walks into a conversation with you without the full picture. And I think you deserve the same. And I think I have been—" He stopped again. "Managing it," Clara said. The words landed with the precision of someone who had identified the problem before he finished describing it. "Yes," he said. "Sit down, Nathaniel." He sat. Clara looked at him for a long moment with the assessing directness that he had stopped finding uncomfortable 3 weeks ago and had since come to depend on the way you depended on level ground, not dramatically, not consciously, but in the sense that its absence would now be immediately noticeable. "Say the thing you came here to say," she said. "Not the diplomatic version, the actual thing." He looked at his hands, then he looked at her. "I don't want you to go back to Kentucky," he said. I am aware that this is not a complete sentence, that it doesn't address any of the practical realities of your land or your life, or the 180 acres that need you before summer planting. I am aware that 3 weeks is not a long time, and that a man showing up at your door in the evening on short notice is not the beginning of a reasonable conversation. He paused. But I have spent my entire adult life being reasonable, and I have recently learned from a source I consider entirely reliable that when something isn't working, you should try something different. Clara looked at him. A beat. Who's the source? She said. You are, he said. Obviously. Something moved across her face, fast, unguarded, the kind of thing that happened before a person could decide whether to let it happen. Then it settled. She looked down at the ledger, then back at him. Nathaniel, she said. What exactly are you asking me? I'm not asking you anything yet, he said. I came to tell you the truth before tomorrow, so that when Elizabeth Harrington arrives, you have the full picture. The full picture is... He met her eyes. I wrote to Bellamy 3 weeks ago because something had already shifted, and I was honest enough to acknowledge it. That something is you. It has been you since a crowded room and a laugh I didn't plan on hearing, and a book about drainage left at my kitchen door before 7 in the morning. Clara was very still. I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight, he said. I'm asking you to not leave in 2 days without both of us having said the true thing. She looked at him for a long time. The true thing, she said slowly, is that I have been telling myself for 3 weeks that this was a pleasant series of conversations between two people who happen to have compatible interests in agricultural management. And, she said, I am 180 acres in Kentucky, and you are 1,000 acres in Virginia, and we have known each other for 3 weeks, and the last time someone told me I was the kind of woman a man in your position might want, he was trying to buy my land. I'm not trying to buy your land. I know that. She looked at him. That almost makes it more complicated. Clara, I'm not finished. She held up one hand, not harshly, but firmly, the gesture of a woman who needed to complete the thought she was building. I left Kentucky because I needed to see my cousin, and because I needed 3 weeks away from a problem I couldn't solve by staring at it harder. I did not leave Kentucky to walk into a situation that would require me to make a decision between the life I have built with my own hands and... She gestured briefly at him, at the room, at all of it, and, he said quietly. She looked at him straight. And something I don't have words for yet. The room was very quiet. Outside, a nightbird called once and went silent. The candle on the table between them burned steady and small. I'm not asking you to choose tonight, he said. I'm asking you to have this conversation before tomorrow so that it happens between us, before it happens around us. He paused. I know what Elizabeth coming here means. I know what my mother is going to say when she finds out I rode to this house at this hour. I know exactly how this looks to everyone in this county who has been watching the past 3 weeks. He looked at her directly. I don't care about any of that as much as I care about whether you know the truth before any of it starts. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, What is the truth, Nathaniel? Say it plain. The truth, he said, is that I have been alive for 35 years, and I have done everything I was supposed to do, and I have been good at it, and it has cost me something. I didn't have a name for until I walked into a library 3 weeks ago and sat down across from a woman who argued with me about drainage and told me I was wrong and was right about it. He paused. The truth is that signing that contract would be the most sensible decision I've ever made, and also the first one I am genuinely certain would be a mistake. Clara closed her ledger. She set her hands flat on top of it. All right, she said. All right what? All right, I'm not leaving in 2 days. She said it the way she said everything, direct, without ornament, as if the decision had been made somewhere behind the words, and she was simply reporting it accurately. I'll write to my farm manager. He can handle the early planting preparation. I've done it alone before. He can manage 2 weeks more. She paused. But Nathaniel... Yes, I meant what I said. I am not going to become someone different because it would be convenient. I am not going to learn to talk about gardens and weather and who is performing appropriately. I am not going to walk into a life that fits the shape of what this estate needs and sand down every edge of myself to fit it. I know that. Do you? She looked at him steadily. Because the woman you are describing wanting the woman who sends books before breakfast and argues about almanacs and tells Thomas Caldwell. His price is insulting. That woman does not become a different woman because the stakes get higher. She gets more like herself. Her eyes held his. I want to know if you've thought about what that means. He had thought about it. He had thought about it in the North Fields and in the study and in every carriage ride home from the county library for 3 weeks. He had thought about his mother's carefully managed dinner parties and the conversation about gardens that went in circles and the specific hollow silence of doing everything correctly. He had thought about a house that was large and well-run and profoundly quiet, in the way that well-run things were quiet when there was no one in them who made unexpected sounds. I have thought about it, he said. And I think the version of this estate that has a woman like you in it is the version that has been missing something it couldn't identify for a long time. Clara looked at him. For just a moment, just one something crossed her face that she didn't manage in time. Something that looked like the answer to a question she had been asking herself since before she sent a book to a man she had not yet spoken to, and possibly longer than that. Then she picked up her pencil. I'll write to my farm manager tonight, she said. You should go home. You have a conversation with your mother to prepare for. I'm aware. And Nathaniel. She looked up. Go talk to Elizabeth Harrington. Not tomorrow when she comes here. Tonight or first thing in the morning before she makes a call that costs her something. Her voice was quiet but certain. She's a good woman. She deserves the truth from you directly, not secondhand through Mrs. Patton and a visit to your cousin's house. He stood. He held her gaze for a moment. You know, he said, most people in your position would be thinking primarily about themselves right now. I am thinking about myself, she said. I don't want to begin anything on ground that isn't clear, and that ground isn't clear until you've talked to her. He put on his hat. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she said. He walked out into the night. Elizabeth Harrington received him the next morning at 9 o'clock in the small sitting room off the main hall of the Harrington house, which was the room used for conversations that were private without being intimate. Her mother was not present. He had specifically requested through the groom who carried his note at 7 in the morning that the meeting be private. Elizabeth was already seated when he came in. She did not stand. She looked at him with the same composed, careful expression she had worn at every gathering, at every dinner, at every exchange. But underneath it this morning, something different. Something he had not seen before because he had not been looking a person waiting to hear something she already knew was coming and had been holding the weight of for longer than he had realized. Miss Harrington, he said. Mr. Whitaker. She gestured to the chair across from her. Please sit. I imagine this conversation will take a moment. He sat. He had prepared on the ride over a version of what he was going to say that was honest and respectful and appropriately framed. He discarded it. I owe you an apology, he said. She looked at him steadily. Go on. I have allowed a situation to develop over the past 3 weeks that I should have addressed directly and much sooner. The arrangement between our families, the contract I wrote to Bellamy 3 weeks ago and asked him to hold it, and I did not tell you. That was wrong. You should have been told directly and immediately, not through the county social network. No, Elizabeth said. I should have been told before you wrote to Bellamy. He absorbed this. You're right, I'm sorry. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands, then back at him. I have known, she said, since approximately 4 days after the spring gathering that something had changed. My mother told me to wait and see. I agreed to wait and see. She paused. Not enjoy the waiting and seeing. No, he said. I imagine not. Is it Miss Beaumont? He could have softened it. He didn't. Yes. Elizabeth nodded once. The nod of someone confirming information they already possessed. I see. She was quiet for a moment, and he watched her hold the thing not dramatically, not with the performance of feeling, but with the genuine private weight of a woman who had built a plan and was now adjusting to the fact of its dissolution. What I want to know, she said finally, is whether this is impulsive. Whether in 3 months you will have made a very large social disruption for something that turns out to be. I have asked myself the same question, he said, rigorously, every day for 3 weeks. And the answer is no. He held her gaze. Miss Harrington Elizabeth, you are everything my mother described. You are everything I was looking for when looking meant finding the right arrangement rather than the right person. And you deserve a man who is choosing you because you are the right person. I am not able to be that man. I think we have both known that for longer than either of us has said. Elizabeth looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, and it was not, he realized with some surprise, devastation. It was something closer to relief. Complicated, proud, still painful, but underneath all of it, the specific exhale of a person who has been holding a difficult truth for someone else and has finally been relieved of carrying it. My mother, Elizabeth said carefully, is going to be very unhappy. Mine as well. She's going to say you've lost your mind. She has essentially already said it. The corner of Elizabeth's mouth moved, barely. Miss Beaumont must be remarkable. She is. She told you that Thomas Caldwell's price was insulting, didn't she? Mrs. Patton told me that story, and I laughed for 10 minutes. Elizabeth looked at him with something that was very nearly warmth. I hope she makes you miserable in all the best ways, Nathaniel. He left the Harrington house 40 minutes later. The air outside was cool and clear, and he stood beside his horse for a moment before mounting and thought about the specific grace of a woman who could be wronged and still wish someone well, and resolved to make certain that the disruption he had caused Elizabeth Harrington counted for something real. His mother was waiting for him at home. Of course she was. She was in the main study, not the front room where she usually received visitors, but the main study, which was his room. His space and her presence in it this morning was a deliberate choice. She was standing at the window when he came in, which was worse than the chair. The chair was managed waiting. Standing at the window was something else. I heard you went to the Marsh house last night, she said without turning. Yes. And to the Harrington house this morning. Yes. She turned. Her expression was, he looked at it carefully, not the controlled efficiency he expected. Something more complicated. Something that reminded him uncomfortably of what she had said the previous evening. For 31 years, I was sensible about it. The Harrington family, she said, is withdrawing from the arrangement. I asked them to. Nathaniel, mother. He kept his voice level and careful, not hard. I need you to hear me. Not the estate manager, not the heir, me. He looked at her directly. I am 35 years old, and I have run this land well, and I will continue to run it well. The northern boundary is resolved. I handled Caldwell directly. It took one conversation, it's done. The estate's financial position is the strongest it's been in 20 years. I have given this family nothing to worry about. He paused. I am asking for the right to make one decision, one based on what is true, rather than what is useful. His mother looked at him for a long time. She's going to stay, his mother said. It was not a question. She's written to her farm manager. She's staying another 2 weeks. And then we'll see what's true. Nathaniel. His mother's voice shifted, not softer exactly, but more interior. The voice of someone speaking from somewhere that the efficient, composed exterior usually kept hidden. I need to tell you something I have not said before. He waited. When your father died, she said, I managed everything because I did not know how else to grieve. Managing was what I could do when everything else was unavailable to me. She paused. I have been managing you in the same way, because it was what I knew how to do, because the estate needed it. Another pause. I am aware that is not the same as what a mother is supposed to be. He looked at her. I am not going to tell you not to pursue Miss Beaumont, she said. I am going to tell you that whatever you do, you should do it honestly and completely. Not the way your father and I were honest, which was not at all. She straightened. The composure returned, but it sat differently now, like a coat worn over something real, rather than instead of it. Bring her to dinner, properly. Let me form my own opinion. When? Saturday, she said. If she's staying. He nodded. She nodded. She left. He sat down in the main study, his desk, his chair, the familiar weight of the room around him, and registered that the conversation he had just had with his mother was possibly the most honest conversation they had shared since before his father died, and that it had taken a woman from Kentucky to make it happen, and that he was not sure whether to find this funny or moving, and decided it was probably both. Thursday arrived. Clara was at the library when he came in, but she was not at the reading table. She was standing near the shelves on the far wall, a book in her hand, and her posture was different from the usual absorbed stillness. She was tense. He saw it immediately because he had spent 3 weeks learning to read her, and tense was not a word he had previously associated with her. He crossed the room. "What happened?" he said. She turned. She held the book out to him, not the agricultural volume she usually brought, but a different one. A bound register. Property records. "My cousin showed me this morning," she said. "She's been meaning to tell me for a week. She didn't know how." He took the register. He looked at the page she had marked. It took him a moment to understand what he was reading. Then it took him another moment because his mind resisted the information the first time he assembled it. The Beaumont, Kentucky property. Clara's 180 acres had a lien against it. Filed 14 months ago. Filed by a land acquisition company operating out of Richmond. A company that, when he looked at the registration information at the bottom of the page, listed as its primary legal representative one, Thomas Caldwell, Jr. He looked up. Clara was watching him read it. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were steady. She was holding herself with the specific, effortful composure of a woman who had received bad news and had decided before showing it to anyone that she would not let it knock her down. "He filed this 14 months ago," Nathaniel said. 3 months after my father died," Clara said, "when the property was in probate and I was the only one managing it." Her voice was even, flat and even and carefully controlled. "The lien is based on a loan my father apparently took from one of Caldwell's subsidiary companies. I didn't know about the loan. It was never recorded in any of my father's correspondence that I found." She paused. "It may be legitimate. It may not be." Her eyes met his. "But if it's legitimate, my farm manager can't plant anything this summer because we can't take on the labor costs while there's a legal claim against the land. And if I can't plant this summer, I can't meet the harvest obligations that fund the winter operation. And if I can't fund the winter operation..." She stopped. She pressed her lips together once. "He takes the land," she said. The room was very quiet. Nathaniel looked at the register. He looked at the registration date. He looked at Thomas Caldwell's name at the bottom of the page, in the careful legal script of a man who had been planning this long before anyone in this county had any idea he was involved with a small Kentucky property. I thought 8 months of obstructing the northern boundary negotiation. 8 months of making himself indispensable, of creating a situation in which the Whitaker estate needed something that only the Caldwell land could provide. And at the same time, a lien against a small Kentucky property belonging to a woman who had no lawyer and no connections in Richmond, and who had 3 years ago refused twice to sell. He thought Thomas Caldwell doesn't just want to win negotiations. I thought Thomas Caldwell collects things people can't afford to lose. "Does your cousin know a solicitor?" Nathaniel said. "She knows of one. She doesn't have a relationship with one." "I do." He was already thinking the specific organized thinking that the estate had trained into him, the thinking that moved through a problem, the way water moved through a properly positioned drainage channel, finding the grade, following it, not fighting it. "The lien needs to be examined. If the loan documentation is irregular in any way, if it wasn't properly witnessed, if the interest terms weren't disclosed correctly, if the probate court wasn't notified as required, it may be challengeable." He looked at her. "Do you have your father's financial records? In Kentucky. Can your farm manager get them to you?" She was already calculating. He could see it, the rapid, practical assessment of resources and timelines and what was possible. "If I write today, and he can get into the filing cabinet, yes. A week, maybe 10 days. Write today." He set the register down. "My solicitor's name is Edmund Bellamy. He's good and he's thorough. and he has been working with this family long enough to understand what legitimate land documentation looks like. He paused. I'll speak with him this afternoon. Clara looked at him. Nathaniel, she said. I'm not. She stopped, tried again. I didn't show you this because I needed rescuing. I know that. I showed you because you know this county, and because... She stopped again. The composure held, but he could see what it was costing her, and he understood from 3 weeks of knowing her exactly how much it cost a woman who had managed everything alone for 2 years to stand in a library and acknowledge that a problem was bigger than she could handle by herself. Because sometimes, he said quietly, the problem is bigger than one person, and the only mistake is pretending otherwise. She looked at him. That's not rescuing, he said. That's 2 people working on the same problem because they both have something at stake. What do you have at stake? She said. He looked at her steadily. Everything I told you Tuesday night. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then very quietly she said, All right. I was at Bellamy's office within the hour. He laid the situation out completely. The lien, the timing, the Caldwell connection, the documentation gap in Clara's father's records. Bellamy listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Nathaniel valued about him. He took notes. He asked 3 precise questions. Then he said in the measured tone of a man who had seen a great deal of legal maneuvering in his career, if the loan was taken during the probate period without court disclosure, it's challengeable. If the witness signatures aren't legitimate, it's void. If the interest terms exceed what was agreed in writing. He looked up. Get me the records. 10 days, Nathaniel said. I'll be ready. Bellamy paused. The Caldwell family is going to push back. I know. This will not be a quiet resolution. No, Nathaniel said. It won't. He left Bellamy's office and stood on the street outside and took one long breath. Thomas Caldwell had filed a lien against Clara's land 14 months ago. He had simultaneously obstructed the northern boundary negotiation for 8 months. He had, Nathaniel was now entirely certain, been watching the situation, waiting, collecting pressure from 2 directions at once. The Whitaker boundary negotiation was leverage with Nathaniel. The lien on Clara's land was leverage with Clara. And when the 2 had come into the same county at the same time, he stopped the thought. He started it again more carefully. Thomas Caldwell knew that Clara was in Virginia. Nathaniel was certain of this now, in the same way he had become certain of the northeast corner drainage problem, through the accumulated evidence of small things that only made sense when you stopped looking at them individually. Caldwell knew she was here. He knew about the library visits. He had possibly known before Mrs. Patton knew, which meant that the timing of Elizabeth Harrington's visit to Mrs. Patton, the information that had reached Robert that had sent Nathaniel to the Marsh house that evening was not an accident. It had been a disruption. Someone had wanted Nathaniel distracted, had wanted the northern boundary agreement concluded quickly on terms favorable to Caldwell before Nathaniel had time to think carefully about who else was connected to what. He stood on the street. I thought about a man who collected things people couldn't afford to lose. He thought about a woman who had refused to sell twice at fair prices. He thought about a lien filed 3 months after a father died against a property managed by a woman alone in a county where she had no legal representation and no one who knew her name. He put his hat on. He went back to the library. Clara was still there. She had not left. She was sitting at the reading table with the register open in front of her, and she was working through something. He could see it in the angle of her head, the stillness that meant active thinking rather than absence. He sat down across from her. It's worse than a lien, he said. She looked up. He told her everything. The boundary obstruction, the timing, the disruption through Elizabeth. All of it laid out the way she had taught him to lay things out, not managed, not softened, just true. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. He's been doing this a long time, she said. Hasn't he? I think so. And he chose my land because I was alone and unrepresented, and he assumed... She paused. Her voice was still even, still controlled, but there was something underneath it now. Not fear. Not the kind of thing that crumbled something harder than that. something that had been quietly building since the moment she read the register that morning and had been looking for a direction. He assumed, she said, that a woman managing a property alone had no one who would fight for her. Yes, Nathaniel said. She looked at him directly. He was wrong, she said. He held her gaze. He said, completely. She reached across the table and picked up the register. She looked at Thomas Caldwell's name at the bottom of the page. She looked at it for a long moment with the expression of a woman who had spent 2 years figuring out how to be right about things that mattered, and who had just found one more thing she was going to be right about. Thursday is going to be a very different conversation than I planned, she said. Yes, he said. It is. The records arrived in 9 days. Clara's farm manager, a steady, taciturn man named Holt, who had worked the Kentucky property since before her father's illness, and who had, in Clara's words, the organizational habits of a man who understood that paper was the only thing standing between a small farm and catastrophe, had packed every financial document from the past 6 years into a single oilskin case and sent it with a trusted courier on the morning Clara's letter reached him. Nathaniel was at the Marsh house when the case arrived. He had been there most mornings for the past week, not because he was managing Clara's situation, which she would not have permitted, but because they were working on it together, which was different. The distinction mattered to her, and so it mattered to him. He brought Bellamy's questions. She brought her knowledge of her father's financial habits and the specific texture of a small property's record-keeping. Between them, they were building a picture. The case landed on the table, and Clara opened it with the controlled efficiency of someone who had been waiting 9 days for this moment, and had decided somewhere around day 4 that she was not going to let the waiting show. She went through the documents methodically, sorted by year, the way Holt had organized them, which meant the relevant period was in the second layer. Nathaniel watched her hands move through the papers. She stopped. Here, she said. He leaned forward. It was a loan document. 2 pages dated 22 months before her father's death, signed in her father's hand, shakier than his earlier signatures, the signature of a man whose illness had already begun its work. The lending party was listed as a Richmond investment firm called Harwick Capital Associates. The terms were on the second page. Clara read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at Nathaniel with an expression he had not seen before. Not the controlled steadiness she wore when she was handling difficult information, but something rawer than that. Something that had just been confirmed rather than suspected. The interest rate, she said. He looked at the document. He looked at the figure. He looked at it again because the first time he looked at it, he assumed he had misread. He had not misread. That's usury, he said. Yes. Her voice was flat. And there's no witness signature on the second page. There should be 2. There's one and the one that's there. She turned the document toward him and pointed. Look at the date beside it. He looked. The witness signature was dated 4 months after the loan was issued, which meant either the witness had signed a document they had not been present for illegal, or the date had been altered worse. Bellamy, Nathaniel said. Bellamy, Clara agreed. They were at the solicitor's office within the hour. Bellamy took the document, examined it with the focused attention of a man who had spent 30 years knowing exactly what he was looking at, and said without looking up, Where did you say this lending company is registered? Richmond, Nathaniel said. Harwick Capital Associates. Bellamy wrote the name down. I'll have my contact in Richmond look at the registration records today. He looked at Clara directly. Miss Beaumont, was your father in the habit of taking loans without informing you? No, she said. In the last 2 years of his illness, yes. He didn't want me to worry. He didn't tell me the extent of the medical debts either until... She paused. Until it was too late to manage them differently. Bellamy nodded. Not with sympathy exactly, with the particular gravity of a man absorbing information that mattered. And you found no other documentation of this loan in his correspondence, no repayment records, no letters from this company, nothing. Nothing. That's significant, Bellamy said. He set the document down. A legitimate lender sends correspondence, repayment schedules, reminders, notices. If there is none of that in 2 years of your father's papers... He looked at Nathaniel. The registration records will tell us what we need to know about Harwick Capital. They knew by the following morning. Nathaniel was at Bellamy's office at 7:30. Bellamy was already there. He handed Nathaniel a single sheet of paper, the registration record for Harwick Capital Associates, forwarded by the Richmond contact overnight. Nathaniel read it. Harwick Capital Associates had been registered 18 months before Clara's father signed the loan document. Its registered agent was a law firm in Richmond. Its principal investor listed as a silent partner under a subsidiary holding structure that required 3 layers of registration records to trace was Thomas Aldridge Caldwell, Jr. Nathaniel set the paper down. He created a lending company, Nathaniel said. Specifically, to target properties he wanted, Bellamy said. Yes, that's what this looks like. He paused. I've seen it before. Not often, but it exists. A man identifies a vulnerable property, usually in probate, usually managed by someone without legal representation, creates a legitimate-looking lending entity, issues a loan with predatory terms to someone who is ill or desperate and waits. If the family pays, he profits from the usurious rate. If they can't pay, Bellamy spread his hands. He acquires the land through the lien at a fraction of its value. And the loan documentation, Nathaniel said carefully, the altered witness date, makes the original agreement voidable, Bellamy said. A document with a backdated witness signature has a procedural defect that a court can use to void the underlying contract. He looked at his notes. The interest rate alone may be sufficient under Virginia law, even if the document were otherwise valid. At the rate listed here, the loan terms exceed the legal limit by a significant margin. What do we need to do? File in the county court, Bellamy said. Challenge the lien on grounds of predatory lending terms and documentary fraud. I'll prepare the filing today. He paused. But Mr. Whitaker Caldwell is going to respond. He'll bring his own lawyers. He'll argue the document is valid. This goes to a hearing. When? I can request an expedited hearing given the land is under active management constraint. 2 weeks, possibly 3. Do it, Nathaniel said. I went to the Marsh house. Clara was in the front room when he arrived, standing rather than sitting, which told him she already knew the night had produced something. He had sent a note at 7 that morning asking her to be there. She had been there since 6:30, according to Adeline Marsh, who had developed the habit of reporting Clara's movements to Nathaniel with the fond accuracy of someone who had decided she was invested in this situation and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. He told Clara everything. All of it. Harwick Capital. The registration record. The subsidiary structure. Bellamy's assessment of the documentary defect. The hearing. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. He built a company, she said, to take my land. Yes. He was doing this before I refused to sell the first time. The registration predates your first refusal by 6 months. Yes. She looked at the wall, not blankly processing the way she processed everything, with the focused internal movement of someone who was assembling pieces into a shape that made sense. He knew I wouldn't sell, she said slowly. He knew before he made the offer. So the offer wasn't an offer. It was documentation that he had attempted a legitimate purchase before pursuing the lien. She looked at Nathaniel. He planned for me to say no. Yes, Nathaniel said. I believe so. She breathed through her nose once. That is, she said, the coldest thing I have heard in a long time. Yes. All right. She straightened. The processing had completed, and what came out the other side was not fear and not devastation. It was the specific directed energy of a woman who had just identified the problem precisely and was ready to work. What do I need to do for the hearing? Be there, Nathaniel said. Bellamy will present the documentary evidence. You'll need to testify about your father's financial habits, the absence of correspondence, the fact that he didn't disclose the loan to you. Your credibility as a witness matters. I can do that. I know you can. She looked at him. You're going to be at the hearing. Yes. Nathaniel. Clara. He held her gaze. He used the northern boundary obstruction to keep me occupied while he pursued your land. He timed things to create maximum disruption between us. He has been operating on the assumption that a woman managing a property alone in Kentucky and a man managing a large estate in Virginia have no connection that would cause either of them to look at what he was doing. He paused. He was wrong about that. I intend to be very present at the demonstration of how wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. Something crossed her face, the same thing he had seen in the library the week before. That fast, unguarded thing that happened before she could decide whether to let it happen. This time, she let it stay a little longer before it settled. "Saturday dinner," she said. "With your mother." "Yes." "I reckon," she said, "I should not be late." He almost smiled. "I reckon not." Margaret Whitaker received Clara Beaumont in the formal dining room, which was the room she used when she wanted to make a point about occasion. The table was set properly. The food was correct. Everything was exactly as it should be, including his mother's expression, which was the composed, assessing expression she wore when she was gathering information and had not yet decided what to do with it. Clara arrived in the dark blue dress, the same one she had worn to the Beaumont spring gathering, the same one she had been wearing when Nathaniel first heard her laugh. He noticed, and felt certain his mother noticed, and felt equally certain that Clara had chosen it without any strategic intention whatsoever, which was somehow the most telling thing about her. "Miss Beaumont," his mother said. "I'm glad you could come, Mrs. Whitaker." Clara met his mother's eyes directly. Not with defiance, with the same natural directness she brought to every interaction. "Thank you for the invitation." They sat. The first 20 minutes were careful. His mother asked about Kentucky. Clara answered specifically and without embellishment. The acreage, the soil type, the rotation schedule she had implemented in her second year, the particular challenge of the eastern pasture drainage. His mother listened with the focused attention she gave things she was evaluating, and Nathaniel watched from across the table as the conversation moved through its careful opening phase. Then his mother said with the precision of someone who had been waiting for the right moment, "I understand you advised Nathaniel on the northern boundary matter." "I advised him to name what was happening," Clara said. "He already knew what was happening. He just needed someone to confirm that saying it plainly was an option." "And the Caldwell negotiation resolved?" "Yes, in one conversation." His mother was quiet for a moment. 8 months, she said, and there was something in her voice, not quite approval, not yet, but its antechamber. 8 months of correspondence and one conversation. The correspondence was useful, Clara said. It established that Nathaniel had made every reasonable attempt. When he finally said the plain thing, Caldwell had no room to claim he'd been ambushed. His mother looked at her. "You think strategically," she said. "I think practically," Clara said. "I've found they're often the same thing." Something shifted in his mother's expression. Subtle enough that someone who didn't know how to read her would have missed it. Nathaniel, who had been reading her since childhood, did not miss it. It was the shift of a woman who had expected one thing and encountered another. Dinner continued. The food was eaten. The conversation moved through the situation with Harwick Capital. Nathaniel had told his mother the day before, because she deserved to know the full picture, and because secrets in his household had already caused enough difficulty. His mother listened to the details of the fraudulent lien with the expression she wore when confronting something that offended her professional sense of how things ought to be done. "A fabricated lending entity," she said, "with an altered witness date." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "Thomas Caldwell Jr. is 29 years old," his mother said. "He has been doing this since before he inherited the property." "Apparently so." She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Clara. "The hearing is in 2 weeks." "Yes," Clara said. "You'll need character witnesses who know the county. People the judge recognizes." She said it matter-of-factly, without ceremony. "I know this county. I have known the circuit judge for 20 years. I will attend the hearing." Clara looked at her. Nathaniel looked at his mother. "You don't need to," Clara began. "I am aware I don't need to," his mother said, with the mild precision of a woman who did not typically do things she didn't need to do. "I choose to. There is a difference." She lifted her water glass. "The Whitaker name means something in this county. It ought to mean something useful." A pause settled over the table. Clara set her fork down. She looked at Margaret Whitaker with the direct, unperformed attention she gave everything that deserved it. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, "I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't need to thank me," his mother said. "You need to win." Nathaniel caught his mother's eye across the table. She looked away first, which was not something she typically did, and which told him everything he needed to know about how the evening had landed. The 2 weeks before the hearing moved fast and slow, at the same time the way time moved when something large was approaching, and the waiting itself had weight. Bellamy prepared the filing with thorough methodical care, building the case layer by layer, the usurious interest rate, the backdated witness signature, the absence of any legitimate correspondence over the loan period. The registration records tracing Harwick Capital to Caldwell through 3 subsidiary entities. Each piece was documented. Each piece was sourced. By the time Bellamy was finished, the case looked the way a properly positioned drainage channel looked inevitable, following the natural grade impossible to argue with once you could see it clearly. Clara wrote to Holt twice more requesting additional documentation. Both times, Holt produced exactly what she asked for within 3 days, because Holt was a man who had spent years learning that Clara Beaumont's requests were precise, and her reasons were good, even when she didn't explain them. Nathaniel spent the mornings at Bellamy's office, and the afternoons at the Marsh House, and the evenings in his study, going through the Caldwell subsidiary documentation, with the careful attention he gave every legal problem that came through the estate. He slept adequately. He ate adequately. He moved through the days with the organized purposefulness of a man working towards something that mattered. His mother came to dinner at the Marsh House 4 days before the hearing uninvited with a covered dish and the expression of a woman who had decided that a thing was worth doing and was doing it. Adeline Marsh received her with the slightly overwhelmed graciousness of someone who had not expected Margaret Whitaker at her door and was not going to waste time pretending she had. Clara received her in the front room, and they sat together for an hour, while Nathaniel remained in the small study off the hall, where he had been working close enough to hear the conversation without being part of it. He heard his mother say at one point, "Your father's medical debts, were they significant?" Clara's voice. "Significant enough that I didn't tell my brother. He would have come back from Philadelphia and given up the law practice. It wasn't worth it." A pause. His mother. "You handled it alone." Clara. "I handled it. Whether I handled it alone is a question of definition. Holt was there. Mrs. Patton wrote letters. I had help. Just not the kind of help that makes decisions for you." A longer pause. Then his mother, in a voice that was quieter than her usual register and more careful. "That is a kind of strength I recognize." Nathaniel sat in the small study and held very still and listened to his mother recognize something she had spent 30 years not naming. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear. The county courthouse was a sober brick building that smelled of paper and old wood, and the particular atmosphere of a place where things were decided. Bellamy arrived first, already organized. Clara arrived 5 minutes later in a dark green dress he hadn't seen before, and she stood in the anteroom with the stillness that meant she was fully present and fully ready, and was not going to perform either. His mother arrived with 2 of the county's most established landowners' men. She had telephoned the previous week with the brief efficiency she brought to every logistical task, and she arranged them in the gallery without comment, because she had understood without being told that a young woman from Kentucky, challenging a Caldwell in a Virginia courtroom, needed the county to see that the county was watching. Caldwell arrived with 3 lawyers. He saw Nathaniel, and his expression moved through several things. Quickly. Surprise assessment recalibration, before settling into the composed, controlled expression of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and knew how to hold himself in them. He saw Margaret Whitaker and the 2 landowners in the gallery. His expression did not change. His eyes moved to Clara. Clara looked at him directly, not with anger, not with the performed composure of someone managing fear. With the simple, clear attention of a woman who had been looking at this situation for 14 months and had finally named every piece of it and was not afraid of any of it anymore. Caldwell looked away first. The hearing proceeded with the formal structure of county court proceedings. Opening statements, presentation of evidence, testimony. Bellamy was precise and thorough, the way he was precise and thorough about everything, laying the Harwick Capital registration chain out document by document until the connection to Caldwell was as clear as the fraudulent witness date on the loan agreement. Caldwell's lead lawyer, a sharp-eyed man from Richmond who had clearly handled similar situations before, argued that the registration structure was a standard business arrangement, that the witness date discrepancy was a clerical error, that the interest rate, while high, fell within certain interpretive provisions of Virginia commercial law. The judge, a man named Aldous Pemberton, who had been on the circuit bench for 18 years, and who had, in Bellamy's assessment, the most reliable sense of when someone was being lied to of anyone he had appeared before, listened to all of it without expression. Then he asked Caldwell's lawyer a question. He asked if the witness date discrepancy was a clerical error, could the firm produce the original witness who had been present at the signing? Caldwell's lawyer said he would need time to locate the witness. The judge said he had until after the lunch recess. After the lunch recess, the witness could not be produced. The judge looked at Caldwell directly, not his lawyers. Caldwell himself, and asked a second question. He asked whether Caldwell had any documentation of communication between Harwick Capital and the Beaumont family over the period following the loan issuance. Any correspondence, any repayment records, any notices. Caldwell's lawyer began to respond. The judge said he was asking Mr. Caldwell. Caldwell said there had been some communication. The judge asked to see it. There was a consultation between Caldwell and his lawyers that lasted approximately 4 minutes and was from the gallery visibly not going well. Caldwell's lawyer then informed the court that the relevant correspondence had been misfiled and was not immediately available. The judge looked at the paperwork before him for a long moment. He said that in 30 years of practice and 18 years on the bench, he had found that misfiled correspondence had a habit of appearing when it existed and remaining misfiled when it didn't. He said that the documentary record before him showed a predatory interest rate, an unverifiable witness signature, and a complete absence of the routine correspondence that accompanied every legitimate lending arrangement he had ever encountered. He said that these were not individually conclusive, but that collectively they painted a picture he found compelling. He found in favor of the plaintiff. The lien was declared void. The room was very quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Clara pressed her hand flat against the table in front of her, a small private gesture, the gesture of a person anchoring themselves against something enormous. And Bellamy set his pen down, and his mother in the gallery made a sound that was not quite a word, but carried the weight of one. Caldwell did not look at anyone as he gathered his papers. His lawyers spoke to each other in low voices. He walked to the door, and he opened it, and he paused for just a moment with his hand on the frame. He looked back. Not at Nathaniel, at Clara. She held his gaze. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He left. Bellamy was already organizing the paperwork. Clara stood up slowly, the way a person stood up when their legs were steadier than they expected. She turned. Her face was not triumphant, not the bright performed victory of a dramatic moment. It was something quieter and more real, the expression of a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a long time and has just set it down. She looked at Nathaniel. He looked back. "Your land," he said quietly. "My land," she said. And there was in those 2 words the whole of 2 years of managing a loan and refusing to sell, and reading everything she could find, and making the right decisions under pressure, with no one watching and no one helping, all of it, contained in 2 words, said quietly, in a county courthouse in Virginia. His mother appeared at Clara's shoulder. Clara turned. Margaret Whitaker looked at her for a moment, with the assessing, careful attention she gave everything. Then she said simply, "Well done." Clara looked at her. "Thank you," Clara said, "for being here." "I told you," his mother said. "You needed to win." She paused. "You won." They walked out into the afternoon together, all 3 of them, which would have been 2 months ago, an arrangement that Nathaniel could not have predicted or imagined. His mother spoke briefly with the 2 landowners. Bellamy organized his case and departed with the efficiency of a man whose work was complete and who had other work waiting. Clara stood in the afternoon light with her hand at her side and her face turned slightly upward, and breathed long and slow, the breath of someone who had come through something and was only now allowing themselves to feel how much it had cost. Nathaniel stood beside her. After a moment, she said without looking at him, "I need to go back to Kentucky." "I know. Holt needs me for the planting. We've lost 3 weeks of preparation. We can recover it, but I need to be there." "I know." She looked at him then. The direct, unguarded look that he had come to understand was the truest thing about her. The look that meant she was not managing what she said next, just saying it. "Come and see it," she said. "The land, before you decide anything." He looked at her. "You've heard me describe it for 2 months," she said. "You know the drainage situation and the soil composition and the eastern pasture problem, but you haven't seen it." She held his gaze. "Come and see what I've been building, before either of us says something that can't be unsaid. I thought about 1,000 acres in Virginia and 180 acres in Kentucky, and 2 people who had learned to work on the same problem from opposite sides and found that the work went better that way." He thought about Northeast Corners in Chapter 7, and a woman who sent solutions before breakfast because a problem existed and it would have been strange not to. "When?" he said. 2 weeks, she said. "Give me 2 weeks to get the planting started, then come." He nodded. "I'll be there," he said. She looked at him for one more moment with all the things that had been said between them, and all the things that hadn't, with the whole of 8 weeks in libraries and courthouses, and his mother's dining room with the weight of 180 acres and a cleared lien and a decision that was not yet made, but was being made steadily. The way all real decisions were made, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of every honest thing said to another person over time. Then she said simply, "Good." She picked up her bag. She walked to Adeline Marsh's waiting carriage, and Nathaniel Whitaker stood in the afternoon light in front of the county courthouse and watched her go and felt for the first time in longer than he could name that the life ahead of him was not a thing to be managed. It was a thing to be chosen. He rode into Kentucky on a Tuesday morning 14 days after Clara's carriage had pulled away from the courthouse. He had counted the days. Not obsessively, or at least that was what he told himself each morning when he woke up and knew exactly how many remained. He had spent the 2 weeks in motion finalizing the northern boundary documentation with Bellamy, reviewing the estate accounts for the quarter meeting with the Whitaker farm managers about the summer rotation. He had done all of it with his usual thoroughness. He had also, without quite deciding, begun reading everything he could find about Kentucky soil composition and small property agricultural management, which Robert Alderton had noticed and commented on, with the mild, delighted expression of a man watching something he had predicted come true. "You're going," Robert had said. It was not a question. "In 2 weeks," Nathaniel had said. And then I'll know more than I know now." Robert had looked at him with the 30-year expression. "You already know. You've known since the spring gathering." Nathaniel had not answered. He had known. The Beaumont property appeared the way Clara had described it, not in the details, because the details of land were always different from the description of land, but in the character of it. The quality she had communicated across 2 months of library conversations, a place that had been worked honestly, that showed the evidence of careful thought applied to limited resources, that had the specific texture of somewhere a person had decided was worth fighting for and had fought for it. Holt met him at the gate. A broad-weathered man in his 50s who looked at Nathaniel with the assessing directness of someone whose loyalty was already fully allocated and who was deciding how much of it the visitor deserved. "Mr. Whitaker," Holt said. "Mr. Holt." "She's in the east pasture." He paused. "You can leave your horse here. The east pasture is better walked." Nathaniel left his horse. He found her where Holt said she'd be, not because Holt's directions were particularly detailed, but because the east pasture was the one she had talked about most. The problem pasture, the one with the drainage challenge that mirrored and inverted the situation at Whitaker's North Fields, the one she had been working on for 2 seasons and had partially solved and was still not satisfied with. She was crouched at the edge of a channel line, her hand in the soil, her back to him. She heard him coming. The ground was dry, and his boots were not quiet, and she stood and turned, and for a moment neither of them said anything. She looked. He thought like herself. Completely, entirely herself. Mud on her hands' hair, coming loose from its pin. The expression of someone who had been thinking hard about a practical problem and was still partway inside it. No performance of the occasion. No management of the moment. Just Clara in her east pasture, with the problem she had been working on before he arrived and would return to after. "You came," she said. "I said I would. People say things." She looked at him steadily. "You came." He looked at her. He looked at the pasture, the channel work she had done, the careful positioning that he recognized immediately as the application of the same principle she had sent him in Chapter 7, adapted to different terrain and different constraints. He looked at the evidence written into the land itself of 2 years of making right decisions alone. "Show me the drainage problem," he said. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned and showed him. They spent the morning in the east pasture. She explained what she had tried and what had worked and what hadn't, and why with the specific precision of someone who had analyzed failure as carefully as success. He asked questions. She answered them. He offered an observation about the Western Channel angle that she considered for a moment, and then said, "That might actually work," with the same tone she used in the library when he had made a point that was correct. Genuine, unornamented, the acknowledgement of someone who cared about the answer more than the credit. Holt appeared at midday, with food delivered without ceremony, and with the expression of a man who had made a decision about a visitor and was acting on it. They sat on the fence rail and ate, and Clara talked about the planting they'd gotten in over the past 2 weeks, and what the summer rotation looked like, and what she was worried about, and what she wasn't. And Nathaniel listened with the full attention he had learned in 3 months of knowing her was the thing she valued most. Not agreement, not reassurance, attention. "It's good land," he said when she finished. "I know it is. You've done something real here." She looked at the pasture. "I've done what needed doing." She paused. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Doing what needed doing means the land required it," she said. "Doing something real means you chose it. I chose this. Every decision, the ones that worked and the ones that didn't, I chose them." She looked at him. "That matters to me." "I know it does," he said. She looked at him with the direct, unguarded look. "Why did you come, Nathaniel? The real reason, not the version where you came to see the land." He set his food down. "Because you asked me to," he said. "And because every time in the past 3 months that you have told me to do something I was not certain about, it has been the right thing to do." He paused. "And because I am 35 years old, and I have spent a very long time being certain about things that didn't matter, and uncertain about the one thing that does." She was very still. "And what is the one thing?" she said quietly. "Whether I am capable," he said, "of choosing a life because it is the right life, rather than because it fits correctly into the shape of what I was supposed to want." She looked at him. "And," she said. "And I believe I am," he said. "I believe I have been since a Thursday evening in April, when I heard a sound I wasn't expecting and turned around without deciding to." The fence rail was quiet under them. The east pasture spread out on both sides, worked and honest and full of the evidence of real choices made by a real person. Clara looked out at her land for a long moment. Then she said, "I have been alone for 2 years. Not lonely. I want to be clear about that. Alone. Managing this land, making these decisions, being the person who was responsible for every outcome." She paused. "I am good at being alone. I am perhaps too good at it. It has become comfortable in the way that difficult things become comfortable when they are all you know." "Clara, I'm not finished." She kept her eyes on the pasture. "I need to tell you that I am afraid. Not of you, not of what you're describing, but of what it means to stop being the only person in a room where all the decisions happen." She turned and looked at him. "I have spent 2 years learning to trust my own judgment, absolutely, because there was no one else's judgment available. I don't know how to share that. I don't know if I know how. I think," Nathaniel said carefully, "that the woman who argued with me about drainage in a county library the first time we spoke, and who told me exactly what our conversations were and were not, before I had the courage to ask, and who looked at Thomas Caldwell Jr. in a courtroom and did not look away. I think that woman knows how to do more than she gives herself credit for." Clara looked at him. "I'm not asking you to stop making your own decisions," he said. "I'm asking you to make them somewhere I can hear them." A long pause. Then Clara Beaumont, who had sent books before breakfast and refused to sell her land twice and told the truth in every conversation she had ever had, said, "That is the most reasonable thing anyone has ever said to me." "I've been practicing," he said. The corner of her mouth moved. The real one, not the social smile, not the managed warmth, but the actual thing. The thing that had come before it that night at the Beaumont gathering, when something funny had caught her off guard in a crowded room. Then her expression changed. It shifted in a way he had not seen before. Not the processing shift, not the assessing look, but something that moved from somewhere deeper. Something that had been waiting to surface for longer than 3 months. She looked at him with all of it visible at once. The fear she had named, and the certainty she hadn't named yet, and the 2 years of alone, and the East pasture, and Chapter 7, and everything that had been building since a woman had laughed in a crowded room, and a man had turned around without deciding to. "Nathaniel," she said, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me." "The morning I sent you that book," she said, "I had been awake since 4. He said nothing. He waited. I couldn't sleep. I had been thinking about the spring gathering, and about you. About a man who had said something in passing about a drainage problem to his friend across a room, not knowing I could hear, and who had said it with the specific exhaustion of someone who had been carrying that problem for a long time, and didn't expect it to be solved. She paused. "I got up at 4 in the morning and went through my cousin's bookshelf because I could not stop thinking about the northeast corner." "You told me you were thinking about the problem," he said. "Not me." "I lied," she said simply. "Or not lied. I was being careful. I was not ready to admit 3 weeks in that I had been awake since 4 in the morning, thinking about a man I had met once across a crowded room." He looked at her. "I have been careful," she said, "the entire time. Every conversation. Every line I drew about what these conversations were and weren't. All of it was true, and all of it was also me being very careful not to let something happen that I couldn't manage the consequences of." She held his gaze. "I am done being careful." He stood up from the fence rail. She stood up from the fence rail. They were standing in the east pasture of 180 acres of Kentucky land that she had refused to sell twice and fought for in a Virginia courthouse, and worked back from the edge of loss with her own hands and 3 farm hands and 1 very good book, and he was a man who had burned a marriage contract in a fireplace because he heard a laugh and understood in 3 seconds that he had never once been fully alive before that moment. "Clara Beaumont," he said. "Nathaniel Whitaker," she said. "I would like—" He stopped. He had rehearsed this. He discarded the rehearsal. "I would like to court you, formally, with your full awareness of what I am asking and what it would mean and what it would not mean." He paused. "I am not asking you to come to Virginia. I am not asking you to become something different. I am asking for the right to come back to Kentucky in a month and the month after that, and to keep having conversations that are necessary until we have both had enough of them to know what the true thing is." She looked at him. "And if the true thing," she said carefully, "turns out to be complicated, then we figure out the complicated thing," he said. "The way we figured out the drainage problem and the Caldwell situation and every other problem we have worked on since April. Together. From the actual grade, not against it." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Yes. Just that." One word said in the direct, unornamented way she said everything that mattered. He breathed. She breathed. Holt appeared at the gate of the east pasture. At that precise moment, looked at both of them and turned around and walked back the way he had come, without a word, which was, Nathaniel thought, the most eloquent thing he had witnessed in some time. He stayed 3 days. 3 days in which he saw every acre of the Beaumont property and met every person who worked it and understood in the way you only understood a thing by seeing it rather than hearing it, described what 2 years of deliberate, careful, determined work looked like when the person doing it knew what she was doing and refused to be talked out of it. He saw the eastern drainage channel she had repositioned in her first autumn when she had no reference book and only the evidence of 2 bad seasons to work from, and which he recognized with a start, followed the same principle as Chapter 7, without having read Chapter 7, because she had looked at the problem long enough to see the natural grade. He saw the records she kept meticulous, precise, organized in a system of her own design that was more efficient than the system his estate used, and which he photographed mentally with the intention of discussing it with his farm manager when he returned. He saw her with her farm hands, not managing them from a distance, but working alongside them, knowing each one's strengths and specific knowledge, and the particular way each needed to be asked rather than told, in order to do their best work. He saw Holt watch her with the expression of a man who had worked for a lot of people and knew the difference between competence performed and competence lived. He saw on the second evening something he had not expected. They were sitting in the front room after supper. Clara with her ledger, Nathaniel with the soil composition records she had let him borrow, and she looked up from her figures and said without preamble, "Tell me something true about your father." He looked at her. "You never talk about him," she said. "You talk about the estate after he died. You talk about what you learned managing it. You talk about your mother." She set her pencil down. "You never talk about him." Howe was quiet for a moment. "Howe was a careful man," Nathaniel said. "Careful the way I am careful. Everything considered, everything weighed. He made good decisions." He paused. He was also, I understood this only after he was gone, profoundly unhappy. Not in a way he ever said, not in a way he would have named. But I look back now and I see it clearly, a man who made every right decision and lived inside all of them, and never once in the time I knew him looked like someone who had chosen the life he was living. Clara looked at him steadily. "I swore," Nathaniel said, without quite knowing I was swearing it, that I would not do the same thing. He met her eyes. "It took me 35 years to figure out what that actually meant." She looked at him for a long time. "My father," she said, "was the happiest man I have ever known. He had almost nothing by the standards of this county. Small land, small income, 3 children. He couldn't afford to educate the way he wanted. He lost my mother when I was 12. She paused. "He laughed every single day. I cannot remember a day he didn't find something actually funny." Her voice was steady, not sad, the voice of someone describing something they carry carefully because it matters. "The last thing he said to me the week before he died was, 'Clara, don't let anyone make the land into the whole story. The land is just where the story happens.'" Nathaniel looked at her. "I have been," she said quietly, "letting the land be the whole story. For 2 years. Because the land was what I had, and the land was what needed me, and the land was something I could be certain about." She looked at her ledger. "My father would have found that very funny." "And now," Nathaniel said. She looked up. "Now I reckon I'm ready for the story to be larger than the acreage." He arrived home to Virginia 4 days later to find 2 things waiting for him. The first was a letter from Bellamy, informing him that Thomas Caldwell, Jr. had filed an appeal of the county court's ruling and was requesting a higher court review. The letter was thorough and measured. Bellamy was always thorough and measured, and it laid out the likely timeline and the additional documentation that would be needed, and the realistic probability of success, which Bellamy placed in the careful language of a lawyer who did not make promises that substantially favorable to the plaintiff. Nathaniel read it twice. He set it aside. He wrote back to Bellamy with 3 specific instructions and a request for an appointment the following week. The second thing was his mother. She was in the main study when he arrived home, not in the waiting chair, not at the window, but sitting at the side table with a cup of tea and a letter. She appeared to have read several times, and she looked up when he came in with an expression he could not immediately classify. "How was Kentucky?" she said. "Good." "The land?" "Better than I expected," he said. "She's done remarkable work." His mother nodded slowly. She looked at the letter in her hand. Then she said, "I received a letter from Mrs. Harrington this week." He waited. "She writes to inform me," his mother said carefully, "that Elizabeth has received an offer of courtship from a gentleman in Fredericksburg, a widower with 2 children and a property of some 400 acres. She paused. "She sounds, in Mrs. Harrington's description, genuinely pleased." Nathaniel absorbed this. "Good," he said, and meant it. His mother looked at him. "You're not—" "No," he said. "I'm glad. Elizabeth deserves someone who is choosing her. He held his mother's gaze. I wrote to Bellamy from Kentucky. Caldwell is appealing. I know. Edmund sent me a copy. She set the Harrington letter down. I've been thinking about that. And I think, she said, that we should go to Richmond. He looked at her. Not for the appeal, she said. For the court registration records. The Harwick Capital subsidiary structure. There are 3 levels of registration. Bellamy has 1. His Richmond contact found the 2nd. She paused, and her voice carried the specific precision of a woman who had been thinking carefully about a problem. I know the registrar in Richmond personally. I have known him for 20 years. He has access to the 3rd level of records, the initial capitalization documents, which would show whether Caldwell used personal funds or diverted capital from his inherited estate to fund Harwick. She met Nathaniel's eyes. If he diverted estate capital, the Caldwell property heirs, his younger brother, I believe, have a legitimate claim of fiduciary breach. Nathaniel looked at his mother. You've been researching this, he said. I've had 2 weeks, she said. I needed something to do. He sat down across from her. Mother, he said. Why? She looked at him. The composed expression was in place, but he had learned in 35 years of living beside it to read what the composure was covering. What it was covering tonight was something careful and honest and long overdue. Because, she said, she is a woman who managed a property alone for 2 years and refused twice to sell and told the truth in every room she walked into and did not change a single thing about herself when she walked into mine. She paused. And because you looked when you came home from that courthouse the way your father never once looked in 31 years. The room was very quiet. Like someone, she said, who was exactly where he was supposed to be. They went to Richmond the following week. Nathaniel and his mother and Bellamy and the registrar received them with the specific deference extended to a woman of Margaret Whitaker's standing who had taken the trouble to appear in person, and the 3rd level of Harwick Capital's registration documents were produced. They showed what his mother had suspected. Caldwell had funded Harwick Capital in its initial capitalization with $20,000 drawn from the Caldwell estate accounts that were jointly held with his younger brother Daniel Caldwell, who was 26 years old and lived in Baltimore, and had, as far as anyone could determine, no knowledge that his inheritance had been used to fund a predatory lending scheme designed to acquire land through fraudulent liens. Bellamy looked at the documents. Then he looked at Nathaniel. Then he said, I need to write a letter to Daniel Caldwell. The letter reached Daniel Caldwell in Baltimore in 3 days. His response arrived in 4. How was the response made clear? A young man who was deeply shocked, genuinely furious, and entirely prepared to cooperate with any legal process that addressed what his brother had done with the family estate funds. He had not known. He wanted that clearly established. He had not known, and he was not going to pretend otherwise, and he was not going to protect a scheme he had no part in devising. Thomas Caldwell, Jr., presented with his brother's cooperation and the 3rd level registration documents and the choice between a negotiated resolution and a full fiduciary breach proceeding in Richmond, withdrew his appeal within 10 days. The lion on Clara's land was permanently void. The northern boundary agreement held. The East Pasture Drainage Project, which Nathaniel had over 3 months of correspondence with Clara, contributed a specific channel angle calculation that she had tested in August and confirmed worked, produced the best water management results the Beaumont property had seen in a decade. Nathaniel wrote to Clara the morning the appeal was formally withdrawn. The letter was 2 pages detailed, specific, organized the way he organized everything. It laid out every development in the order it had occurred. It included Bellamy's assessment of the final legal standing. It included his mother's role in identifying the Richmond registration angle, which he attributed to her directly and fully because she had earned it. At the end of the 2nd page he wrote, I am coming back to Kentucky in 3 weeks. I have a proposal regarding the Eastern Channel design that I believe is better discussed in person than in correspondence. I also have another proposal that has nothing to do with drainage and that I have been practicing for approximately 4 months. I would appreciate the opportunity to make both. Her reply arrived in 6 days. It was half a page. The Eastern Channel problem has developed a new dimension since August that you should know about before you finalize your proposal. Bring the grade calculations. As for the other matter, Holt has already put fresh hay in the good stall. He says he knew you'd be back. He is extremely aggravating about being right. Come when you're ready. I'll be in the East pasture. He left for Kentucky on a Friday morning. His mother saw him off at the door. Not with the managed efficiency she brought to departures, but with something simpler. She handed him a small package. "For Miss Beaumont," she said. He took it. "What is it?" "The almanac," she said. "The good edition, with the correct water management section." She paused. "I annotated it." He looked at her. "She'll argue with some of my notes," his mother said. "I expect that." He thought she might be looking forward to it. He rode for 2 days. He arrived on a Sunday afternoon, and Holt met him at the gate with the expression of a man who had expected him and was not going to spend any words on the fact, and directed him to the East pasture with the brevity of someone whose communication had been pared down to exactly what was necessary over a lifetime of work. She was there. Of course she was there. She was crouched at the channel line, the way she had been when he arrived the first time, hand in the soil, attention on the problem entirely inside the work. She heard him coming and stood and turned, and the look on her face when she saw him was not the managed composure of their early library conversations, and not the careful steadiness of the courthouse, and not even the quiet certainty of the fence rail in August. It was the look she had worn the night at the Beaumont gathering, when something had caught her completely off guard, and she had laughed before she could decide whether to, and the whole room had disappeared. She was not laughing now. But it was the same look underneath. The one that did not manage itself. The one that was simply true. "You're here," she said. "I said I would be." "You did." She looked at him. "How was the ride?" "Long." "Good long or bad long?" "Thinking long," he said. "The kind where you work through what you're going to say and then decide to say something else instead." She looked at him steadily. "What are you going to say instead?" He had the grade calculation in his saddlebag. He had his mother's annotated almanac. He had 4 months of correspondence, and 2 visits, and a courthouse, and a fireplace, and a laugh he had heard once and never stopped hearing. He did not reach for any of it. "I love you," he said. "That is the other proposal. It doesn't have a plan attached, and it doesn't resolve the practical complications, and it doesn't address the question of Virginia versus Kentucky, or what we do about either estate, or what any of it looks like in 5 years. He held her gaze. "I love you, and I have loved you since approximately 4 in the morning on a Thursday in April, when I was not sleeping, and could not stop thinking about a drainage problem, and I am finished being careful about saying so." Clara looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, with the East pasture behind her, and the Kentucky afternoon around them both, and everything they had been building across 5 months in the accumulated honesty of 2 people who had decided separately, and then together, that the only conversation worth having was the true one. Then she crossed the distance between them. She took his face in both her hands, mud still on her fingers, from the channel work, completely unaware of it, completely herself. And she looked at him the way she looked at every problem worth solving. With her whole attention, nothing held back, no management of the moment at all. "I love you," she said. "I have been awake at 4 in the morning about you since before I sent that book. I have been careful and deliberate and clear-headed about every single aspect of this situation, and I have been completely, absolutely in love with you since the first Thursday in the library, and I am also finished being careful about saying so." He put his hands over hers. They stood in the East pasture of 180 acres of Kentucky land on a Sunday afternoon, and the problem with the channel design was still there, and the distance between Virginia and Kentucky was still there, and the practical complications were still there, and none of it was resolved, and all of it was going to require work and time, and the specific stubbornness of 2 people who knew how to make right decisions under pressure and were not afraid of difficulty. None of that was the point. The point was this: a man who had spent 35 years doing everything correctly had heard a sound in a crowded room that reminded him he was a person rather than a function, and had turned around without deciding to, and had been turning toward the same thing ever since. And a woman who had managed alone for 2 years and refused twice to sell what was hers, and told the truth in every room she walked into, had been awake since 4 in the morning about a drainage problem that was not really a drainage problem, and had sent a book because it was the only honest thing she knew how to do, and had been doing the only honest thing ever since. The East pasture needed the channel redesign. The Virginia estate had a quarter's accounts waiting. His mother had annotated an almanac. Holt was almost certainly watching from the gate and being aggravating about having been right. The world was exactly what it was and required what it required, and they were two people who understood that and who were going to face all of it the way they had learned across 5 months and a courthouse and a library and a Kentucky fence rail to face everything. Together, from the actual grade, not against it. That evening, Nathaniel sat in the front room of the Beaumont farmhouse with Clara beside him and the grade calculations between them and her father's ledger open on the table and Holt's good coffee in hand, and he said, "The western angle needs to shift 4 degrees northeast based on the new section you described." And Clara said, "I calculated 3.5. And he said, 4. And she said, "Show me the math." He showed her the math. She looked at it for 30 seconds. 4, she said. "You're right." He looked at her. "You could have let me be right without confirming it." "I could have," she said. "But that's not how we work." No, it was not. It was not how they worked, and it was not who they were, and it was not the life they were going to build. Not the correct life, not the arranged life, not the life that fit the shape of what other people had decided a man of Nathaniel Whitaker's position ought to want. The life they were going to build was going to be argued over and worked at, and decided honestly, and occasionally wrong, and corrected. And it was going to be conducted between two people who told each other true things because they had both learned the hard way and the long way that truth was the only thing that actually held. It was going to be a life chosen, not managed, not arranged. Not signed at the bottom of a contract on a desk where a book about drainage eventually took its place. Chosen deliberately, completely, with full knowledge of the cost and the complication and the 180 acres in Kentucky and the 1,000 acres in Virginia and the East pasture that still needed work and always would, because that was the nature of land worth keeping. Chosen the way the best things were chosen, not because they fit, but because they were true. And that every acre of it, every argument, every 4 in the morning calculation, every honest word said in a library or a courthouse or an East pasture on a Sunday afternoon was exactly enough.